Okay, so my name is Michael Richardson. I'm here going to talk to you a little bit about the Secure Home Gateway project. It's very interesting, the last speaker, because he asked about liability and other things like this, and in some ways this project was driven by concerns about liability. So CIRA is the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, people who run .ca. I live in Ottawa, I'm a Canadian, and born here in the UK. And basically this project was caused by the Great Mirai attack, same page down. So I've been a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved in a lot of internet-related companies, a lot of IETF work over 25 years, and I dared to comment on the design of this project, which then meant I became the architect of it. So the primary goal of this project was that the CCTLDs, the people who run dot whatever, were very concerned about the Mirai attack, about the way that a bunch of home routers and PVRs, and I really hate to call them IoT devices because I really don't think they are, basically got together and attacked Dyn back in 2016 and took Facebook and Twitter offline for a period of time. And so there's two things that we needed to do. We needed to protect the internet from IoT attacks. We also needed to protect the IoT devices from other attacks from other IoT devices. And this is about risk mitigation, right? So the CIRA basically, like, we can only build our network so strong. At some point, we have to start investing in what the defenses elsewhere. We need to push the defenses that we're doing out to the world. And so what became apparent is that we should build something that is going to help the world be more safe. So what does it amount to? We basically wanted to build a home router that would isolate different devices into different security zones. These guys outside, they're doing something very similar, similar goals, similar technologies, and we're now talking about doing things together. But critically, IoT devices are only useful because of the I part. If they can't talk to each other or talk to the internet or talk to each other, then they don't have a lot of utility. So it's not just about isolating the devices, it's also about figuring out what are the patterns of permitted technology that's done. So along came an IETF spec from a Cisco researcher, which is now published in the spring as RFC 8520. It's known as the Manufacturer Usage Description. And the MUD process essentially is, from a technical point of view, is you put an ACL, or access control list, in a JSON file, you digitally sign it, and profit, right? So we came to this issue of how do we bootstrap this economy of MUD files? Since we have no devices with MUD files and we have no routers that process them, of course, as long as that stays that way, neither party will move. And so we came across the realization that although the MUD specification says that this access control list is supposed to be communicated digitally on the wire through DHCP or LLDP or through my protocol called Brewski, initially there's just nothing out there that does that. We realized, well, you know what, we could actually print a QR code, stick it to the side of the device, and that actually gets rid of our chicken and egg problem by introducing eggs to the ecosystem. And so we did that. And there's a URL at the bottom that actually has a collection of presentations and papers about MUD. And there's been quite a few over the last 2 years in a variety of forums. And this is kind of the architecture that we came up with. So you basically you come along with your smartphone and you scan the QR code on the device, on the packaging perhaps, and it installs in your home router a set of rules about this is what this device is allowed to do. Your light bulb probably has no business connecting to Facebook. But more specifically, in the case of CIRA, it has no business talking to any of the root name servers. Okay? It's just not a permitted activity. What can your light bulb do? Probably the only thing that's interesting is talk to other light bulbs in your home and maybe download software updates. Anything else would be considered wrong, and so that's the goal. But there's other devices that have other mechanisms and other abilities. And Amazon Echo, for instance, is completely useless if you cut it off from the internet, since it doesn't do much of its voice processing locally. So you would need to allow it to connect to appropriate places. But again, it may have no business talking to Facebook, and it certainly still has no business talking to the root name servers. So the onboarding process that we imagined for a new device was essentially Tinder for IoT, right? You either swipe left. I'm not a Tinder expert, as I hope you all assure my wife, that I think swipe left is I like the device. Swipe right is, I think swipe left, I don't like the device. Swipe right is I do like the device. Swipe down is this device is bad. Swipe up is this is a super swipe, meaning it's probably a PC or a phone, in which case it does get to talk to Facebook and anything else it would like to talk to. And so we basically built an app that was a proof of concept for that. Having built that app, we said, okay, right, we've now entered an interesting era. At this point, up to this point, if you managed your home gateway or home router at all, you did it in a web browser. And now we have an app for that. And we said, okay, that's good, that's interesting. There are some vendors that have proprietary apps for their devices. And we said, well, no, actually, we want a standard app that can manage any home gateway, and any home gateway can be managed by any app. So we can have a market of interesting apps of interesting places. For that, we need an API. So, we have this process, we scan the QR code, and we install this API list. Isn't that really cool? Okay, cool. So what does the bad device do? So there's this teddy bear that apparently has been Trojan multiple times. And so what does the bad guy do? He says, here, install these new access control lists. I'd like to attack the internet for you, right? So we said, well, wait a minute, this is not going to work. We have just made it trivial for attackers to now essentially up-level the attack. We don't want to do that. So someone said, okay, we'll put a login password on it. Isn't that good? I see nodding over here. Yeah, login admin, password admin, right? That'll be the answer. I said, no, that's just not going to do. So what do we wind up with? We wound up with the problem of I need to create an onboarding relationship with my home router, and I have an additional challenge, which is that my home router doesn't actually have any internet when I turn it on. In fact, it may have I have to log into it the first time to get internet so I can onboard it. So we had a bit of a challenge there. So we basically have a question of how do we set this up? We want to do this, and we want to set up a TLS client certificate, and we weren't sure exactly. So I happen to also work on a protocol called Brewski. Made up a nice icon for it. I talked about it last year. There's a Professor Andreas who talked about it as well. It's being used by the Thread group and a bunch of other people to do onboarding of IoT devices. And the recognition was that a home router, although we normally think of it as the manager of IoT devices, is itself an IoT device, despite what I said about Mirai and thinking about not, and it should be onboarded with the same process as other things. So we basically said, okay, well, we want to do this correctly and intelligently. We wanted it with a QR code, which we can affix to home routers. And we realized that Wi-Fi Alliance has a protocol called DPP. And we realized, well, we couldn't use DPP as it was for the simple reason that it requires magic 802.11 management frames that you need new firmware in your Wi-Fi chip to use. So we said, well, we're going to simplify it a little bit. We're going to make sure that it is able to do what we want without requiring that everyone have the latest. I think you need a Pixel 2 or 3, and there are no options in iPhone yet to do DPP. So we'd like to be able to do it with every phone, everything. So we basically came up with a process that uses the Brewski process, and you see some nice ducks and other icons like that. And if you want to know more about Brewski, there's several nice talks from me and some other people about this. But this is the process that we go through, and we've built this all. So if you're interested, it starts off, we called it the adolescent router. And you have a phone, and we have what we call a MASA, which is basically the manufacturer's endorsement that this is your device. And we scan a QR code, and we do basically an enrollment process with the manufacturer. And in that process, you could get the whole, do you want to sign up for a warranty and this kind of other stuff like this, maybe log in with Google or something like this. So you'd be doing this from your phone, from your LTE connection. And we get a process that comes back, and we communicate with the adolescent router and say, we do some crypto to prove that the QR code that we saw, some data in there, is in fact it's the right router. It's not your neighbor's router, and it's not your neighbor trying to onboard your router at the right time. We get back what's called a voucher request, It goes up to the massa. This is a Brewski flow. And the manufacturer says, yes, you in fact are the owner of that device. And therefore, I'm going to endorse that you are the owner and you wind up with a secure connection. The end result is that you can do something called enrollment over secure transport, which is an RFC 87030. And what you wind up with is what we wanted, a TLS client certificate on your phone, which is trusted by your router, and you now can do your API-specific calls. Now, this is kind of interesting. It turns out that there's a problem in new houses where you would like to hook up all the IoT devices in the house when you build the house, but there's no owner yet. So who would own it? So there's another problem. Often there's no internet in the new construction. Sometimes there's no LTE reception in the basement. So this process actually turns out to be useful because the guy doing the installation of the furnace in the basement can actually go around and collect all of the information from all the devices there, walk back out to his truck where he's got an LTE connection, get all the right credentials, walk once back into the basement, and they're all set up. And the recognition was, what we didn't want was to make this person walk up and down the stairs 27 times, with their phone, and that would be really unfortunate. So as I said, DPP uses QR code. We decided to extend it. I explained about some of the things before, and synchronous enrollment. And so there's a couple of specs on this. So this process we've called smart clink, which is the sound, that glasses make. There we go. I don't want water. I want to clink the glasses. You see, that's the sound, smart clink, right? That's really it. Okay, and there's an IETF spec on what's happening.